What's up, YouTube? It's me, Dixie Caveman, and I wanted to make a quick video about something that's been on my mind here recently, and it's probably been on y'all's mind too, and it's racism. It's a real big problem here in America nowadays, and I wanted to give you a quick history about racism and the myths about racism and slavery that you probably still believe. And this is my first video, and I have a stuttering problem, so if I stutter, forgive me, alright? So, myth number one. First of all, not all of the slaves that came from Africa were they were forcibly obtained and then shipped over to the New World, but they weren't just kidnapped from their villages and then put on the slave ships and sent over here. A large portion of the slaves that came to the Americas were actually sold to the Europeans, primarily the Portuguese, by their African slave owners, rich kings and chieftains and stuff. They saw that they could make a profit from selling the poor black people to the rich white people, and so that's how a lot of them came to America. Now, there were some that were kidnapped, like just who were flat out kidnapped, but a lot of them, I won't say most, but a large portion of them were actually sold to the white people by the rich black people. So it wasn't a white versus black thing, it was a rich black and rich white versus poor black. Myth number two. Not all of these slaves were white, or were not black who came to America. A lot of them were white. Most of the white slaves were actually contained up north, and most of the black down south. Now, a lot of the white slaves, or indentured servants as they were called, they were actually of Irish descent. And a lot of these poor Irish people gotten taken advantage of by rich Irish people, English people, and American colonists back in the colonial days. And what happened was, the rich people said, we'll buy your ticket to go to America, and if you will basically be our slave for a certain number of years, let's say 7 or 10 years, usually 7, if you be our slave and do whatever we tell you to, literally whatever we tell you to, then we'll pay for your passage to America, and after serving us for so many years, you'll gain citizenship of that country. So a lot of people did that, and once they signed on to that agreement, they were basically slaves for a certain number of years. And that was their social status. They could have been beaten, worked to death, raped. All of that stuff happened to the indentured servants and to the black slaves. So it wasn't a uniquely black thing, and it wasn't a uniquely southern thing, as you probably believe. That's all myths created by the liberal media that a lot of Americans and people worldwide still believe, and it's awful, really. Myth number 3. Now, even though slave life was hard in the North and the South, in the South it wasn't as hard, and here's why. Black slavery was the backbone of the Southern economy back at that time. And so it wouldn't have made sense for them to work their slaves to where they could barely stand up and to beat them to no end if their labor is what makes you rich. Now there were slave masters who treated their slaves badly, just like there were parents who treat their kids badly, but it wouldn't make sense to beat your slaves and to starve them and all that if how good they can work if how much money you make depends on how good they can work. So that just doesn't make any sense. You would want to treat them good physically. You'd want to feed them good, give them enough water, and all that stuff. Now, I'm not justifying slavery. It's wrong and it's bad either way, but it's not as bad as people make it out to be. Myth number 3. I done said that. Myth number 4. Most Southerners did not own slaves. Actually, at the height of slavery, the 1850s and 60s, only 1/4 of Southerners owned any type of black slave whatsoever. Now, that's only 1/4 of the total population. And that's not to say that they owned them on a big-ass plantation and worked the hell out of them. No. So the whole myth about most Southerners being racist slave owners, that's just bullcrap too. It's false. Myth number 5. Well, I guess it's not a myth. It's more of a fact. But slave life up north was actually much harder than it was down south. See, most Southerners, because of their fundamental, Christian values, even if they weren't necessarily Christian, they were still probably raised in a Christian home. They were they didn't believe in, you know, working children very hard until they reached a certain age, usually about 10 or 11, to where they could actually start doing physical labor. But up north, most of the factory owners, who were the ones who owned most of the slaves, they saw no problem with working their children, you know, hard all the time. I mean, you can look in the history books, and there's tons of recorded children, and all people alike, but especially children, who developed stuff like lung cancer and all kinds of diseases from working in the factories, and all the fibers from all the different materials they were working with, giving them cancer and stuff. And I mean, it was awful. Now, it was bad in both places, and it's a dark part of our history, but the fact is, it wasn't as bad down here as people claim it was, and it wasn't as good up north as people claim it was. Something else too. Now, I'm not racist. I'm not. I actually have family who is half black and half white. Now, I don't hold that against them, so I'm not racist. Don't think I am. But I mean, it's okay for a black person to read about the bad things done to black people and be angry about it. That's okay. But the fact of the matter is, black people today, at least in America anyway, are not slaves, and white people in modern day America are not slave owners. So if you want to be mad at someone, be mad at the people back in the slavery days who owned slaves. Be mad at them, but don't hold us white people accountable for what, you know, white people in the past did. You know, I mean, that's just not very smart. I mean, there was a point in time when white people were an enslaved race. The Roman Empire, which came from Italy, the Roman Empire enslaved millions and millions of white people through their marches through Europe. Now, I know what you're thinking. Since the Romans were European, they were white. No, they were actually dark olive tan color with dark hair. They weren't white people. And when they conquered all these Celtic and Germanic tribes, they treated them way worse than most black slaves were ever treated in America. I mean, they raped them to no end, beat them, nailed them to crosses when they didn't do what they wanted them to. I mean, it was awful. Now, as bad as that is, I, as a white person, still have no right to go to Italy and be mad at all the descendants of the Romans for what their ancestors did to my ancestors. I mean, I can't feel the pain that they went through, and you know, the Italians shouldn't be judged for what their ancestors did to my ancestors. I mean, it makes no sense. That type of ideology, it just pulls apart our country. It weakens us, and that's dangerous. You know, it's bad. I'm sorry, I'm stuttering here. I can't help it, but you know, hold me accountable for what my ancestors did, and me hating you for what your ancestors did. It's tearing our country apart, and it's tearing the world apart. And if we don't do something about it, it's gonna eat us. It's gonna tear us apart from the inside. I mean, just like the Roman Empire, like I talked about a little while ago. It was so strong that for a while, no outside force could penetrate it. No outside force could destroy it. But what did destroy it was corruption from within. And if we don't get a hold of this stuff now, then I mean, it's gonna destroy us as a people. It's gonna destroy us as a nation. It's just, we need to get a hold of it, and we need to realize history for what it really was, and we need to move on. We need to we need to acknowledge the bad part of our history, the true bad part of our history. We need to acknowledge it for what it was. We need to learn about it, but we also need to kind of forget it, so we can move on, so we can become better and stronger and more respectable as a nation. I hope y'all liked it. That was my first video, and it took longer than I thought it would be, but that's all right. But yeah, I mean, that's all I gotta say. So I'll make my next video here in a couple of days, maybe. I hope y'all liked it. Peace.